And tonight on the Daily Wrap, President Obama making a bid to diversify wealthy neighborhoods as Hillary Clinton prepares to unveil her economic agenda. But can she shake the Clintons' new elitist image? And find out why Al-Qaeda is reportedly on the verge of bankruptcy. We discuss and debate all of that with Ellis Hennigan, Amy Holmes, and Carl Higbie. This is the Daily Wrap, live from New York City. And welcome to the show tonight. I'm flying solo tonight, and my co-host, Rick Unger, unfortunately out tonight. But in his stead, we have popular television and radio commentator and best-selling author, Ellis Hennigan. Welcome.
Good evening. Thank you. Nice to be with you.
You're the better-looking, more liberal.
I'm no Unger. I mean, I'm no Unger, but I'll do my best.
Okay.
What can I tell you?
Nobody is no Unger, that is for sure. From the Blaze TV, news anchor and former speechwriter for former Senate Majority Leader Bill Frist, Amy Holmes joins us. Amy.
Thank you, a pleasure.
You're looking well.
Thank you.
Okay, and finally, last but not least, well, maybe least, former Navy SEAL and congressional candidate. His name is Carl Higbie. Carl.
Thanks for having me back on.
Outstanding. Nice watch, by the way. We like it.
Thank you.
All right, let's get right to the Daily Download. And the Obama administration is under fire for what one Republican says is an attempt to create an unrealistic utopia. This as the Department of Housing and Urban Development is about to unveil new regulations that would offer grant money to communities willing to build affordable housing within affluent neighborhoods. Arizona Republican Congressman Paul Gosar is trying to block the rule. He tells The Hill, and we quote, "American citizens and communities should be free to choose where they would like to live and not be subject to federal neighborhood engineering at the behest of an overreaching federal government," unquote. Affordable housing advocates are applauding the rule, with one official telling The Hill, and we got more quotes, "This rule is not about forcing anyone to live anywhere they don't want to. It's really about addressing long-standing practices that prevent people from living where they want to." Okay. Also under the new HUD rules, poor neighborhoods would get federal money to improve those communities through better schools, parks, libraries, grocery stores, etc. Is this another government overreach, as some Republicans contend, Mr. Hennigan?
Ridiculous. First of all good stuff in the housing gets done by the federal government. You remember the Fair Housing Act, right? That never would have happened, where it's just the market. Sadly, we have prejudice in our hearts. We don't want all of America to become a gated community. The idea of using incentives, which is really an effective, in fact, kind of market-based approach to this, is actually going to have some good results. And it works lots of places, including New York City, where we are sitting right now, where big, fat, rich developers get extra goodies if they'll put a few affordable apartments inside their buildings. It's an excellent thing, and I would welcome America to enjoy the benefits as well.
Amy, you're nodding your head violently in agreement with Ellis.
Was I? Because I would say,
it's
speak for
day.
yourself. I don't have this discrimination you're talking about in my heart. And in fact, a lot of rich real estate New York developers say there's not enough middle-class housing in New York, and that's one of the big problems that's happening in Manhattan. But I would make the argument that when we talk about diversity, or when the federal government talks about diversity, they only talk about certain neighborhoods. Are we saying that African-American families that have fled Washington, D.C., for example, where I used to live, to move out to Prince George's County, to move into those middle-class neighborhoods, should now be forced to diversify with the neighborhood that they actually left to put their kids into better schools? Are we saying that Little Havana should have to diversify because there are too many Cubans? No, obviously we're only talking about one community, and I think in fact that's discriminatory.
Carl?
Look, if you want to take federal dollars, my tax dollars, and put them into putting people that can't afford certain houses in neighborhoods that they can't afford to be in, guess what? You're going to create a problem with people wanting to move out of that neighborhood. Then that neighborhood will subsequently fall to a lower standard of living because people who are living in those neighborhoods that can't afford to live in the high-priced areas, the issue is that they're never going to assimilate to that lifestyle. It's a very cliquey lifestyle on the 1%. It's a very cliquey lifestyle on the bottom 1%.
I would love to live in a gorgeous multi-million-dollar apartment on the Upper East Side, but I can't because I can't afford it. I'm not asking the federal government to diversify those apartments so that I have that opportunity. I'm thinking, you know what, that's probably out of reach and probably will be for the rest of my life. I think that these market incentives that you're talking about need to be left to the private market, not to the federal government trying to engineer and redistribute people.
But Amy, here's the reality. Everything about the housing industry has to do with federal policy, right? The fact that in your mortgage you get a tax deduction. That is
That's not true in New York City.
A huge
New York City has
impact.
rent control that is city controlled, not federal controlled.
Every single aspect of the housing business. The fact that, let me repeat again, the fact that your mortgage payments, the interest on your mortgage is deductible. If we took that federal goodie away, it would dramatically change the housing industry.
If you have a mortgage. A lot of people don't. I don't.
Well, you know what? One day with these incentives, you too might have a mortgage,
I had a
and you'll
mortgage,
get great
I don't
tax
anymore.
deductions.
Sort itself out. Let the private sector sort itself out. Let people who want to live in nice neighborhoods who can afford to live there. If you can't afford to, don't live there.
And by the way, discriminating based on race
discrimination.
is illegal.
Dividing.
That has happened to me. I've been discriminated based on race in Washington, D.C.
Didn't you want the government to stop that?
Of course I wanted the government to stop it, but I also moved up the street to an apartment that was actually a lot nicer.
Interesting. It's funny you mentioned Manhattan as far as the middle class being driven out. The Manhattan population is actually lower than it was in World War II. Which is astounding to think
because
about.
people don't have kids like they used to.
But
it's also because you don't have families.
There are actually more housing units in Manhattan than there were before, but they don't have 9 children in most of them.
Right.
Which is
the Irish
too bad.
probably left. That's probably why.
Where are the Irish and the Jews when you need them?
Exactly. Well, one's right here, actually. So, meanwhile, Nobel Prize economist Joseph Stiglitz says the United States should take a page from the social democracies of Scandinavia if we want to address income inequality. Stiglitz says the deck is stacked against the bottom third of the United States.
There are many other countries where you would be much better off. Your health would be better, your exposure to environmental hazards would be lower, where your income, even your income, would be higher. Your prospects of going from the bottom third where you are to the top third would be much higher.
And the music's a nice touch. Well, Stiglitz also says the U.S. needs to slow the growth of the top 1%, and that includes higher taxes on capital gains and dividends. As for the middle class, he says the minimum wage should be raised up to $15 an hour in many cities. A prescription for income inequality, or is this class warfare, Mr. Higbee?
Class warfare for sense of politics. Look, if you raise minimum wage to $15 an hour, you're going to do what happened in Connecticut with McDonald's, where they raised minimum wage to $10.10. Now they're putting LCD screens where people were once tellers at McDonald's is. You've lost jobs because of that increase, and that's going to happen across the board.
That's true, and I brought that up on the show before, Ellis, where if we raise the minimum wage, I have a feeling corporations will just say, okay, in the case of fast food, we could just put a kiosk there where you order your food, and we don't even have to hire you anymore.
So by your argument, we should cut it in half, maybe.
What's that?
The minimum wage.
Oh,
maybe
God,
$1, no minimum wage. What would you like?
What
Listen,
I wrote about.
listen,
You asked a question.
You
asked a question. Let me answer it. Thank you. So there is always room for compromise. I was a sports writer first before I got into this business, and $15 is on one end and $7.50 is on the other.
No, some people argue for zero.
I'm not.
Are you for zero?
I say no
zero
minimum wage.
No, he's for no minimum wage.
No, but I can tell you
I'm at where it currently is right now.
Can I make this point?
Sure.
Listen, here's the reality. I mean, I understand all the theories, and they kind of philosophically sometimes, but here's the reality. More and more wealth in our country is being held in fewer and fewer hands, and it becomes more and more egregious every single year. At some point,
it's happened under a Democratic president.
There's all kind of forces that are bigger, frankly, than any president that are pushing it in that direction. And at some point or another, decent people do need to step forward and say, wait a second, we don't want to have one person have all the money in the world. We need to do some policy steps, and this is amenable to policy that can actually give middle and working people a bigger chance.
Okay, so you're at 0, you're at 15. Where are you, Amy?
Here's the reality, as you like to put it. In Seattle, where they did raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour, one of the top chefs there who owns about 10 restaurants is talking about how he's going to have to close 3 because he can't afford the labor costs. So those are people who don't have jobs because of raising the minimum wage. It has also become news in Seattle that the reason why the unions were fighting to raise the minimum wage is they actually exempted themselves. So that means that businesses are now incentivized to hire union members who they don't have to pay the minimum wage. It's actually this shell game that's being driven by unions, at least in Seattle.
Which is also happening in LA right now. And the fact of the matter is, you have to, from a business standpoint, you have to look, does this person add more than $15 an hour to the value of my company? The answer is probably no if they're flipping burgers, so you can't afford to pay them $15. It's simple math.
Ellis, final word?
There's going to be people flipping burgers because we want to eat burgers. This is always the claim every single time the minimum wage goes up. It never turns out to be true. All the money shouldn't be in just a few hands.
Yeah, well, you mentioned a $15 burger. There's actually one on the Upper East Side that's like $24, and it's really no different than anything.
And the
you get
place is
But it's on the Upper East Side.
The place is packed.
with rich
Right.
people.
Victory to
Coming up next, as Hillary Clinton prepares to lay out her economic plan this weekend, Bill is contradicting her on her email use. What's going on? Keep it right here. This is Newsmax.